All right, good morning. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the intro. Basically what I want to talk about is drone technology and just kind of some of the different safety operation aspect, and then just kind of getting through some of the regulatory as well. We're still seeing the FAA Part 107, which is the actual license by the FAA to operate a drone, is coming up on 2 years now, but we're still seeing a lot of people in the industry that are not familiar with the regulations. They're putting drones up on different operations or in their organization, not realizing that they may actually be breaking the law. So I'll talk a little bit about that momentarily. So looking at how does a UAS, and a UAS is an unmanned aerial system. Most people obviously know it as a drone. But how can it benefit safety operations? So obviously the drone can actually be deployed to capture high definition photographs, video, thermal imaging of assets that were previously had to be viewed from the ground, or that were too remote, too dangerous, or too expensive to deploy crews to inspect. As FAA regulations permit, the drone can also be used for beyond line of sight operations. As a company, we've already been involved in multiple situations where we have done beyond line of sight operations, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those. So it basically allows to have a quick and effective assessment of a large area. One of the most important reasons for deploying a UAS is to advance the aerial capabilities of safety operations while providing cost-effective technology. It's actually pretty amazing, just literally going up 20, 40, 50 feet in the air, how your perspective completely changes what you would traditionally see on the ground. And so it's definitely a highly valuable asset. Looking at the cost benefits, UAS can be acquired for as little as $1,500. We have some systems in there that you guys are more than welcome to take a look at afterwards. That have a variety of different sensors, thermal imaging cameras, long-range zoom cameras. We have lighting systems on them, laser pointers, and then we also are starting to, those of you that may do anything in the, as far as monitoring with meters and such, we are actually deploying FORGAS and RAD sensors now on drones. Which is actually changing really the dynamics of hazmat and a lot of the operational hazards that traditionally have been done in other methods. So looking at, like I said, about $1,500 on up. Average helicopter cost of operation is about $750 per hour. So they're very cost effective, allowing multiple systems to be deployed throughout a region or area. The maintenance costs are very, very minimal. The actual operational cost through a study that was done says they are about $3.36 per hour to operate. Looking at some of the safety applications, critical infrastructure inspections, damage assessments, risk management, crew and personnel monitoring or management. And kind of talking on that is, you think you have a very large site, for example. It can be very difficult to get, for one, you only get a limited view on the ground, but it can be difficult to cover a large area to be able to monitor crews, personnel, or facilities and whatnot. So the drone allows you to quickly assess those areas. Search and rescue, security and emergency response teams, and then, as I mentioned, hazmat, CBRN, and there's many, many more applications. Talking a little bit about the FAA Part 107, I wanted to put this first bullet point in here because we still are seeing people that are not fully understanding this, and it's important for us to educate people that are operating drones. So basically, if you're operating a drone for any commercial operation, and I put in quotations there, even without compensation. So if you have a buddy and you guys are with a company or organization and have a friend of yours that says, hey, can you come out and take a couple photos for us? And even if you are not paying them, if they do not have their FAA Part 107 license, they are looking at them and also you at a minimum $25,000 fine. I just wrapped up 3 days of operations down in South Florida with the FAA. We were providing crowd monitoring and drone detection for the Fort Lauderdale Air Show. We had 7 drones being flown actively during the air show, which of course posed a huge safety risk. And the FAA made interaction with each one of those operators and is pursuing the investigative and then the civil penalty, which, as I said, is $25,000. So something to think about. It's not a hard process to get, but I would definitely recommend making sure that if you guys are contracting out somebody, that they have that, because it's highly important. And the FAA is now cracking down not only on the operator, but the person that hired them. So under Part 107 rules, the drones that are regulated is everything from 0.55 pounds up to 55 pounds. The operator must maintain visual line of sight. The systems that are coming out now have the ability to fly 3, 4, 5 plus miles. That doesn't mean that you can actually do that. It's kind of like a car. You have speed limits, but of course they can go faster than the speed limit. So the drones can fly well beyond visual line of sight, but as under FAA Part 107, you have to maintain visual line of sight. The maximum altitude above ground level is 400 feet, and no operations over people, and daylight operations only. There are, of course, different waivers that can be given. For example, like we have a night operation waiver because we do a lot of things at night. But that's a process that has to be gone through to get the recommended approvals. Talking a little bit about, so we have some systems, and this is actually in the Tampa area. We have some sensors that we've deployed, and from a safety and a risk management standpoint, we're seeing more and more drone flights on a daily basis. Through a lot of our clients that we talk to, we're hearing about drones that they found crashed on their property, some that are flying over their maybe critical infrastructure areas that they shouldn't be. And so we have some sensors, as I said, deployed in the Tampa area that we're literally just 24 hours, 7 days a week monitoring the drone flights that are being done. We're cataloging all that information to include the serial numbers of the aircraft, where they're operating, what they're doing. We're recording all that telemetry data, and it's being stored on our server. So we also work with clients, of course, that may have different facilities that they are concerned in wanting to make sure that drones are not necessarily flying over their facilities. And these sensors, of course, have the ability to detect that. So that's just a heat map that kind of shows where we're seeing a lot of the activity in the Tampa area. We're averaging about 200 to 300 flights per 30-day period. So for example, if you look here, this was just a 30-day period that I pulled up, 230 flights. It'll give us all the breakdown as far as the maximum altitude and different times and dates that they're operating. But it's definitely something to think about because, from a safety standpoint, for one, obviously, those of you that are in critical infrastructure or have facilities that you may not want things flown over, it can definitely pose a problem. I know I talked to a few people here from some of the theme parks, and that's another application. From a liability standpoint, it comes down, crashes on somebody's head. Then what? So there are means and there are systems in place that to prevent those types of things. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we did during Hurricane Irma. We actually did the largest strategic pre-deployment of drone assets during a disaster in the world. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, what we did, because I think it really shows the value of drone technology and how it can be used in both from a safety standpoint and in disaster response and such. So we actually had 22 of our flight teams deployed for 14 days. I deployed 22 of my teams 2 days before Irma hit. I had teams deployed all the way from Jacksonville down to Homestead, all along the East Coast, as well as to Naples, up to Bradenton. We conducted over 650 flight missions during that 14-day period, covering over 550 miles. Our primary task was inspecting critical infrastructure surveying damaged commercial structures, residential homes, and surrounding areas. We did coordinate, as I mentioned, with the FAA for beyond line of sight operations that we had to conduct. And one of the things that was interesting is this is really the first time that drone technology had been used in that large of a scale of an incident. And in talking to some of the utilities and such that we were working with, we saved days off of the restorations efforts, which of course to them, equaled millions and millions of dollars per day. So it was definitely a very beneficial piece of equipment, and really exciting to see that the technology. A few years back, a lot of people had the perception that these were toys. This is an industry that is not going away. They're not toys. They're basically, it's a drone is nothing than an aerial device to carry a sensor in the air, whether that's a camera, a meter, or whatnot. So looking at, this is basically us before we rolled out to Hurricane Irma. We initially thought we were going for 3 days, and it ended up being 14 days. Just some of our crews down there on Alligator Alley. If you see the blue dot, that's the Fort Lauderdale area. That's where we set up our fixed base operations. And the thing that was interesting about Irma is obviously it affected the whole state, as I'm sure a lot of people here are aware. So we initially were going to the South Florida area, set up our fixed base operations because we assumed that, and based on the path at that time, that was going to be kind of ground zero. We were affected quite a bit from the storm there as well as our crews along the state were, but not obviously as bad as the Fort Myers and Naples area. Not sure if this will play or not. This is actually a view from my hotel room in Fort Lauderdale. We pretty much shortly after this, we were lights out for the next 4 days. And of course the whole area was as well. So we had about 120 mile-an-hour winds here. Fixed base operations that we set up, we had a couple hotel rooms that we had there. Looking at some of the imagery that our crews captured, and just really showing the value of the drone and where it can benefit. This here is at 75 feet up in the air. So you look at how much you can actually see just going up 75 feet. This is a marina down in South Florida. Quick assessment, obviously, looking at that and the type of damage that we saw. Trees down. We saw thousands and thousands of these photos from our teams all over the state. Of course, a lot of power lines down. There was millions and millions of people affected without power. One of the things that was interesting and unique is in working specifically with the utilities. From a safety perspective, with their crews, what they would normally do is once they encountered areas that they deemed inaccessible prior to Irma, the way they did it is they would mark it on their software on their device. They would then skip over that area, and that would be the last to be restored. That didn't happen this year, and that's why the restoration was so much quicker. And I know obviously a lot of people, every time I talk to people in the state, they said, oh, it seemed like it took forever. The news only shows a snip of what actually was going on. I was down there for the entire 14 days seeing what's going on all over the state. And the effects were devastating in a lot of areas. And so, I know it may seem like it took a while, but it actually was much quicker than it would have been by traditional means. And so with the drones, we were of course able to get into areas that, like I said, were sometimes unsafe to send crews. We could quickly assess an area, evaluate it. For example, get very high definition imagery like this. Look at what type of fuses need to be replaced, and then all that information was relayed in real time back to the incident commanders and could dispatch the appropriate crews for restoration. That's actually a line crew down there, so we of course have the ability to sit up in the air, monitor them, make sure that they're safe, and they're doing what they need to be doing, and being able to have a different perspective that they can't see from the ground. And of course, like I said, saw a lot of these types of things. This was one of our crews up in the Central Florida area that really there was no other way. They were operating for about 3 days on this Marshmaster here, and the area that you see, that was actually their landing zone that they had for 3 days. And really, in traditional methods, there would be no other way to get out to and assess these areas without the benefit of the drone. Just looking at some of the staging sites and such in Irma, there was over 18,000 contractors that were brought in. I met people as far away as Washington State. This is just one of dozens of staging sites all over the state. That's another one there. Another one, working with our crews. Obviously, that was our mobile command center, so we were able to deploy that out into an area and be able to manage the operation remotely. That's inside the operations center there. We did deploy, as you'll see in the photo there, we did deploy in a lot of areas multiple drones, and that's one of the things that is important, obviously, for coordination efforts, is to be able to look at and having communications with different teams that might be out there operating and knowing where they're at. And of course, obviously, as I mentioned, the Part 107 teaches a lot of these things. I know there may be some questions, so I kind of wanted to open it up to questions that I might be able to answer. I wanted to kind of get through a lot of this material and see, is there any particular questions that I can answer regarding the technology or how it works? Is there any, let me ask real quick, actually, just so I have a good grasp. Is there anybody in here that is currently using drone technology by a raise of hands in their organization? Okay, so I see like maybe 2, 3. Okay, maybe a few more. So, and has anybody encountered, I know if I talked to a few people earlier in the exhibit hall, is there anybody that has encountered drones that you guys are not operating, that have been found on your property or have been operating over maybe one of your job sites that has presented maybe some issues? By a raise of hands, has anybody encountered that? Okay, interesting. Yeah, and it's the industry, like I said, it's not slowing down. It's only growing. There's over 1 million of these things being sold every year. A lot of them to hobby recreational users that, of course, don't understand how they can use them, and they're maybe using them just for fun to gather pictures, videos, and such. But they are a tool. They are a professional tool, and there's a lot of value that they can bring to your organization. So, any specific questions that I might be able to answer?
Do you complete risk assessments prior to operations?
Yes, sir, we do. So, that is one of the things for our teams, and I'm not sure if I mentioned, so our company, we have the end-to-end solution side. We have actually kind of 2 divisions of the company. So we do the hardware, software, training, and whatnot, and then we have our service side of the company, which is what you saw during Irma. And every site that we're going out to, we are, of course, doing risk mitigation and putting together kind of our plan of action to look at what are the risks. We are evaluating all that. For example, we have a contract with one of the major cruise lines where we're doing all their shipboard inspections of all their anchor points. And of course, there's passengers that are on the ship for all but except about 1 hour. So, and we're operating in a very busy port and whatnot. So we have to, of course, look at what the risk looks like, and we're putting together procedures to mitigate any type of risk. Any other questions that? Okay.
Do you rely on the FAA to interact with local authorities who might have helicopters up, with news agencies who might have helicopters up during a disaster or at any time? Or do you communicate directly with the organizations in a specific area, like a county or a city?
So it depends on the type of operation. For example, obviously in a disaster, there's a lot of different authorities, such as a hurricane, things like that. And typically we're working very closely with those organizations. As a company, we do a lot in the government space with public safety agencies, state, local, federal, and DoD. And so, like for example, I mentioned the recent operation that we were just doing in South Florida. We were working in conjunction with local law enforcement, fire rescue, and the FAA. That was kind of interesting though, is the FAA was there running the air show. Well, we ended up through our detection systems having day one, we had 4 drones that were actually flying right in the box where the air show is actively going on. So the FAA actually sent out immediately. I mean, it went all the way to DC. It was a huge issue because it could be catastrophic given 200,000 people watching an air show. And so the FAA actually sent out their inspectors, and they actually were working with us in our command center.
As this industry grows, do you see having representatives at local EOCs, emergency operations centers, during emergencies? Just as
From the FAA, or?
Well, no, an organization like yours. Because, I mean, utilities, every police department in the area have representatives at an emergency operations center during an emergency. So do you foresee that coming with a drone representative, a drone company representative?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely could see that. We already are doing a lot of work as a private company with government organizations, and one of that is kind of educating them. Not all government organizations still fully understand the capabilities of this technology, how it can be used, when it can be used, where it can be used, and things like that. So, we do this stuff day in and day out. It's our job to make sure that we know everything by the book. So I could definitely see a need for that, and we have provided, our subject matter experts in situations like that to be able to assist them. Yeah.
One last question. Have you been involved at all in the newest, from what I understand, at least in this country, the newest operation for the drones bringing AEDs, or CPR devices to citizens who might be in need, who've been identified?
Yeah. So there are, I am familiar with some companies that are working to provide that. There actually is some legal challenges with that currently because in the U.S. delivery is not, you're basically doing beyond line of sight operations typically, unless, for example, like let's say a golf course, and maybe they're out on one of the holes. For the drone to actually be flown miles and miles away and autonomously and deliver it in, from a legal perspective with the FAA would be considered a beyond line of sight operation. So unless you had a waiver to do that, which in a heavily congested urban area, the FAA is very reluctant to approve those at this time. Not to say that that's not coming, and there is cases in Europe and other countries where they are actively doing this. I do see from a regulatory standpoint that eventually changing here, like anything. The government is not always quick to catch up with technology. But so far, they've been very progressive in accepting the technology and working to put regulations in place that will further allow the expansion of the technology. Yeah.
Got a
Question?
question. How many
Yep.
drones did you lose during your Irma surveillance?
Actually, 0. So we get that. People ask us that a lot. We actually did lose 0, and as a company, we basically, for example, we talk to a lot of companies or organizations, agencies, and they always say, well, we want to train on an inexpensive drone, so we're going to crash it in case we crash it. Well, reality is, it's just like your car. When you go get your driver's license, you don't go buy a cheap car necessarily because you're going to crash it. If you receive the proper training, you shouldn't be crashing these things. And that's a big kind of misconception, is you should be crashing and doing things like that. A lot of it comes down to proper training, and if you're trained properly, I could tell you the people that we train and the agencies that we work with, when they complete our training, they're efficient and they don't crash. Accidents may happen, of course. We all understand that, but you shouldn't be going into it thinking I'm going to crash this thing. There was another question back here.
I just wanted to know how they're powered. Is it electronic and battery operated, and how long they're able to stay in the air?
Yeah, so all the systems that we operate are battery powered. Most of them can operate, our longest is about up to 50 minutes. We do have systems for if we're going to be in a fixed base operation where we don't need to be moving the drone. We have tethered power as well, so we can actually run up to 200 feet in the air. Just think of it like a kite string, and it's actually providing permanent power, and it can stay up there for days on end if need be.
Do you anticipate getting into the drone surveillance Sentry program like they have in Europe?
You mean as a company, or do I see that?
As a corporation, yes.
I'm not specific with the drone Sentry. From a surveillance standpoint, I can say that we do already work with a lot of different government entities in different monitoring efforts currently.
Over there, they have a separate drone or personal hangar charging system, and then when they're called, they go out and survey a wide area and come back.
Yes, and I am familiar with kind of the drone in the box concept, where they have their own charging, their remote launching, and things like that for security organizations. A lot of that still comes down to the regulatory environment. So once that catches up, yes, I could see, pretty much if it has to do with drone technology, we're already kind of involved. We have our pulse on it already. So it's just, we haven't gone into that avenue necessarily because of the regulatory environment that's in place.
So what's the operating envelope in terms of weather for a typical drone, commercial drone?
Yeah, so operating, like in Hurricane Irma, for example, all of our flight teams were instructed not to fly above any winds above 30 miles per hour. The systems that we were operating could fly up to about 35, 40 mile an hour winds, but we set our envelope typically at 30 miles an hour. And they do have the ability to fly in weather as well. Of course, they're not going to fly in a Florida torrential downpour, which you wouldn't be able to see anything anyway. But light rain and things like that, they can fly in.
Anybody else?
Earlier, I believe you mentioned something about preventing the drone from hovering above property.
Hovering above what?
Like establishments?
Yes.
Is there technology out there to prevent that from happening? One of the concerns is possibly weaponizing the drones and then release into large gatherings?
Yeah, so you bring up a great point. And, you know, obviously I talked about a lot of the beneficial value of drone technology. You know, being involved in the DoD and government space like we are, there's obviously a lot of nefarious actors that are using drones as a delivery mechanism overseas. And unfortunately, you know, our folks in the DoD community that we work with are encountering this technology on a daily basis to deliver, you know, things such as IEDs and whatnot. Yet definitely from a you know, U.S.-based homeland security standpoint is a concern and something that those of you that you know, on the risk management and safety side, if you're not thinking about, I can tell you that you should be thinking about it. They're from the technology, and we have it next door if you'd like to see it, but we can detect, locate, identify, and track. The mitigation piece, of course, is taking that immediate action with authorities and such, being able to pinpoint where the operator is and you know, go interact with them. The one thing that if, you know, there's a big misconception that, you know, hey, I have a drone fly even over my house, I can shoot it and this and that. That's actually a federal felony, believe it or not, because the FAA considers it a aircraft. So you would be taking down an aircraft. You can't jam it, the signal either. The only three entities currently in the United States that can do anything to prevent, meaning jam, take down, things like that, in the U.S. are DoD, Department of Energy, and the U.S. Secret Service. That's it. Outside of that, I mean, not even local law enforcement. You know, like for example, we worked, we did Times Square up in for New Year's Eve just this past January, working with NYPD and Secret Service, doing that operation, and obviously having the representative there, you know, gave us some additional abilities. But it definitely is something that I would encourage all of you to think about from the risk management and safety standpoint. The other thing that we're seeing drones utilized for is corporate espionage and running different sensors and such that, I mean, you know, our guys in the office and some of the stuff that we get into, and you know, we're not the only ones. I mean, there's plenty of people out there that have knowledge base of utilizing technology for, you know, illicit purposes. And those are all things that, you know, I would encourage you all to start kind of thinking about. You know, it amazes me every day that you know, we're of course living in the environment that we do, and you know, coming from a law enforcement background, you know, it's not getting any better. You know, we have folks that are, you know, renting rider vans and running people over and things like that, which it's, you know, utilizing a drone, you have the ability to do it, you know, easily, and you know, it's just a delivery means. You know, most from a safety security standpoint, most facilities a lot of times are fairly hardened or secure from the ground. The vulnerabilities that are posed are from the air, and you know, that goes for, you know, I mean, we do vulnerability assessments on facilities all the time, and you know, we may or may not discuss it with the people, but we're, you know, our folks in the backgrounds that we come from, we're always looking at that stuff, and it's actually quite scary to me. You know, even places that people think are secure, you know, from our perspective, the security is very minimal. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ryan, appreciate that.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.